Parental advisory warning. The following episode contains liberal use of the word fuck, and derivatives thereof, a scathing rant by yours truly about alternative medicine practitioners, and a meatball recipe that may induce uncontrollable salivation. Please listen responsibly. Hello and welcome to this episode of Shredded by Science Radio. We're back with another round of your questions from the Eat, Train, Progress group, myself and the slightly unwell Ginger. I tried to put ninja and invalid in a word salad together, but it just kind of comes out as ninja-valid, and it doesn't really trip off the tongue particularly well. We've got some questions today about pseudoscience. We've got some questions about unwanted advice on your lifts at the gym, individual needs, wants, and metabolism and stuff like that, and ketogenic dieting. So we're going to rattle through all of these, mainly so Patrick doesn't die on the line. He can go and die quietly afterwards. Patrick has been super ill for about a week. We didn't podcast last week because the man flu consumed him.
That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah, it's major man flu.
And the way I think of it is, it's got to be a pretty bad illness to take someone that's as manly as I am down. And so this obviously, it might be Ebola. That might be what I have.
Or bird flu.
Or bird flu. Yeah, I eat a lot of chicken thighs, so that could be what's going on. I apologize if I cough during this podcast.
Yeah, I've instructed Patrick to try and cough while I'm talking, like that, so that I can edit it out if needs be, as opposed to when he's talking and you're having to suffer through him coughing in your ears mid-answer. So, shall we jump into the first question?
Yeah, let's do it. This is from Kimberly Mills, and shout out to Kimberly. I have to tell you, too, that Kimberly is one of my favorite people. She is awesome. When we go to the fitness summit in Kansas City, which is it's basically a fitness convention that goes on every year. A lot of pretty popular names in the fitness industry lecture at this thing. And Kimberly is driving people to and from the airport for several hours just because she's a good person and she lives in the area. And then she also brings chocolate covered almonds. Typically, like it's almost like like an almond brittle or something like that. So if you can just imagine sheets of dark chocolate with almonds in them, and so she's a very well liked individual, and I just wanted to say that. So Kimberly, if you're listening to this, you are awesome, and thanks for the question. I'm going to read it now. When you have clients that strongly buy into ideas that fall into the realm of pseudoscience. So, for example, during your training session with them, they want to talk to you about the newest book that they bought, promising some sort of miracle diet or supplement, etc., that no one is telling you about because of fill-in-the-blank conspiracy theory. What do you do about that? Because you want to educate them, you want to provide them with the best evidence-based advice, but this might be someone who's convinced that scientists are just paid to produce those results and doctors are trying to keep you sick and those kind of things. How do you respond to clients when something like that happens? And I think this is such an awesome question.
It's a really difficult question as well.
It absolutely is a difficult question. And do you want to tackle this first, or do you want me to ramble for a while? It's up to you, dude.
I'll just start off by saying that the whole conspiracy theory, alternative medicine, doctors are trying to keep you sick, the government is stopping scientists from doing what they do. I think we can quite conclusively say that, and bad language coming up, so if you have any young children listening, maybe remove them from the room.
Good warning.
It's fucking bullshit. If doctors do not train for 7 years, it's certainly 7 years in the UK, you have to do 5 years of basic training and then 2 years as a junior doctor, and then however many years as a registrar before you can become a consultant. They don't train for that long and pay tens of thousands of pounds to train to keep you sick. That's not how these things work. Yes, pharmaceutical reps may influence some things, but it's not a case that doctors are trying to keep you sick. I think that is an absurd notion. Also, the whole argument of, well, doctors get paid by pharmaceutical companies to keep prescribing certain drugs. Yeah, how about your alternative medicine practitioner? Do they work for fucking free? I don't think so. No. Again, it's horseshit. So why on earth people are listening to these absolute quacks? I have no idea. And the whole scientists are just producing the results that they are paid to produce. Well, how about the results of whatever quote unquote study discovered these conspiracy theory results? Who funded that? What incentive do they have to produce good quality science? What incentive do they have to be rigorous with their methods, to control the variables that they need to? There is none, other than, again, their main financial incentive is in getting a result that's going to get people to buy their goddamn snake oil. So, again, I don't see how people can listen to these and completely basically, they don't know anything about how scientists work, about how science works, about how the medical profession works. It's the old adage of, alternative medicine that works is called fucking medicine.
Yep.
Anyway, that's not how you broach it with your client. That was just my own personal little rant. You can bring the small children back into the room now if needs be. I will try and keep it clean here on out.
Good rant, man.
As to how you would tackle it with a client, I think this is where I would probably just actively show an interest in it and actively get them to think properly about it. So I wouldn't necessarily turn around and say, no, I don't think you should try that. I would just encourage them to think a little more deeply about the idea. So basically ask a ton of why questions. So why do you think this is a good idea? Well, why do you think that result is what it is? Why do you think they wrote that? What do you think they get out of this? All of the rest of it. Just encourage them to try and think a little more skeptically about the idea. If they do, amazing. If they decide to not try said miracle diet, supplement, whatever, then that's a win on your part. You've managed to get them to make their own mind up. I think with stuff like this, based on my experience of primarily arguing with people on the internet, you are never going to change someone's mind, especially when it comes to something like this. People, they only ever change their own minds on something like this. So you need to either lead them into changing their own mind, or you let them make the mistake. You are powerless to do anything else as a personal trainer. You are not a trained medical professional. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the time, you're not even a trained scientist. So you are powerless to do anything else other than let them make their mistake, support them through that, and guide them into seeing their own mistakes a little bit further down the line. This is not to say you turn around and sarcastically go, well, I fucking told you so.
That's what I do.
Well, for some people, they may respond perfectly fine to that. But it's a case of allowing them to make that mistake and then allowing them to see the error of their ways, and maybe over time become a little more inherently skeptical about these crackpot conspiracy theorist nonsense.
I think that's a great answer, man. I would only add in, and I'm not necessarily adding much to what you've said, I guess, but I think that communication, like tactfulness, needs to be quite strong in this conversation. Meaning, I think that if you are going to try to convince someone that what they're suggesting isn't really a good idea, I think you need to approach that quite carefully. And I also think that it depends on whether or not the idea they're considering could be potentially harmful to them. And so I think there's a difference between, just to pull a random example, like someone doing are you familiar with the HCG diet that was a fad for a while, Lawrence, where there are some drops that people would take and then they would couple that with a 500 calorie a day diet?
I've heard of it.
And my understanding was that the pitch was something about these drops being important for weight loss when they're putting you on a 500 calorie diet, which is just absurd.
Wow.
So something like that is probably a bit more extreme than someone saying something like, I'm going to do the paleo diet because of a book that I purchased. Whereas I think we can all agree that while paleo does get sometimes criticized, you could have a perfectly healthy diet doing a paleo diet, whereas it's probably difficult to have a perfectly healthy 500 calorie a day diet. So I do think that might be an important distinction to make in terms of what level of importance is there for you to intervene, at least with your opinion, and say, hey, I just want you to know here's my opinion on this. And to me, it would also depend on, is this an example of it's the first time you've met with a client and you're doing your first training session? Is this an online client where you've established a relationship for several months? And so maybe having that relationship established might give you a little more license to say, hey, I just want you to know here's my objective opinion on what's going on here. So those are my additional thoughts.
Just to round that off, just in case anyone is listening and is a little confused as to kind of the actual influence of like the funding source of a study. I know that's something that's come up in conversation recently. There is very good evidence that medical studies done that have been sponsored by the tobacco industry and quote unquote big pharma, so pharmaceutical companies, that does often lead to research outcomes that seem to favor the sponsor. That is a thing that does sometimes happen, and that can be down to the researchers how the research question is framed. In a research study, you have to set out what you're looking to investigate, and often that can be spun to favor the sponsor. There was a classic example of tobacco companies funding studies into lots of other air pollutants, for example, to kind of take the heat off the tobacco industry. And then obviously the design of the study can favor the sponsor. So whether control groups were used or whether like enough blinding was done or whatever, just the little things in the study design can often favor the sponsor. There's also the fact that like a null result, so no difference between groups, or like a negative effect, that sort of thing is much less likely to be published in a journal, and that's down to something called publication bias, where journals are far more likely to publish things that show a result. You know, if you do a study and you're like, oh, there's no difference, people aren't particularly likely to publish it. And then you can also, in the study manuscript, like the way you phrase your interpretation of the data, you can often phrase it to somewhat skew the results in terms of the conclusions you draw from it. So you may not draw the conclusions from that data that don't favor the sponsor deliberately. So you may just leave those kind of hanging in the air, floating as unsaid. There was actually a meta-analysis done back in 2016, a systematic review and meta-analysis on nutrition studies, found a small association between industry sponsorship and more favorable outcomes that approached statistical significance. So it was too small to be definitively there, but it could be there. So the authors said at the end of that, these findings suggest but do not establish that industry sponsorship of nutrition studies is associated with conclusions that favour the sponsors, and further investigation of differences in study results and quality is needed. So it can happen. it is a legitimate concern to worry about the funding source of a research study, but as yet we don't have enough good quality evidence to show that it's a major problem in nutrition studies. So big pharmaceutical companies and tobacco companies, yes, they are far more likely to influence the outcome of studies that they sponsor. Nutrition, we're not quite at that level yet. So it will depend on the realm. And again, I go back to my point of just trying to make them think more skeptically about it.
Based on what you've just said, a couple just minor points that are more for amusement. I find that people will tend to be entirely dismissive of like all research, just assuming that, oh, this is all biased. It's all funding bias, and therefore I'm just going to disregard all of it and believe whatever I want, much in the same way that people who tend to believe in conspiracy theories will cite one rare actual conspiracy theory that happened and use that as evidence for all these other conspiracies somehow being true. And I just think that it's not very rational of a belief system to do that. But I see it happen all the time where people will find like one flaw, or they'll say, well, modern medicine isn't perfect. Look at this mistake that happened, and use that to justify just disregarding it entirely. And I just think that's foolish.
There was a really good series of episodes on Freakonomics Radio, all about bad medicine. I think there were 3 parts to this particular series, and they were a really great listen. If you want to learn more about the flaws in modern medicine, because there are flaws and there are many flaws, but at the same time, I think it's still ludicrous to say that doctors are just trying to keep you sick.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And that's not something that I gleaned from any of those podcast episodes. So, next question we have Susan Coombers. How do you handle unwanted advice on your lifts at the gym, particularly when the advice isn't very good or relevant to you? What if it's coming from a successful lifter or someone with more experience than you? I go back to what I said for the previous question and get them to think deeply about why they're giving you the advice. Just ask, well, why? Why? Be a child. Keep asking why. And if they can't give you a good reason, I think you are perfectly within your rights to go, well, sorry, I'm not going to take that advice if you can't justify it.
I agree. Like, I've had this happen to me before.
Yeah.
I was training in Florida. I was in contest prep for a powerlifting meet and a few weeks out, so it was fairly heavy work. And it was a strongman gym, and I don't know the name of the owner. He was doing some very, very impressive log pressing. And whereas later I did some log pushing. Thank you very much. Anyway. Yeah, he was basically, I should back up a step. I squat with a fairly narrow stance because I'm much, much stronger in that position. And because if I go wide, it hurts my hips. It literally just hurts and I can't hit depth. Could be a mobility thing, could likely just be a hip anatomy thing. But he took one look at my squat and just immediately said, if you want to get stronger, you need to go wider and, really wide and push your hips back. And, the traditional kind of what you see certain power lifters do. And so I kind of just brushed it off, but I was very polite. I said, yeah, thanks. That's good advice. I'm really close to a competition, so I can't really change this now because I'm a few weeks out, but I appreciate your feedback. And I just left it at that because I knew I wasn't going to see the guy again. And, that was pretty much it. But I would say generally, if I have someone give me some advice, I'm going to listen to it and evaluate it on the merit of the advice and consider, ask them why, consider the reason. And, if I think it's valid and I'm in a position to try it, I might try it, but I certainly want to have a good rationale for why someone would suggest to do something. And I find that the majority of the time, there's not usually a good reason why. And that's not some sort of judgment on everyone. I'm sure there are some people that are very knowledgeable that give good advice, but you'll get people saying things like you should put your feet up on the bench and don't arch your back on the bench and stuff like that. And these are well-meaning people that probably don't understand the context in which they're giving the advice.
I think we also need to distinguish between people giving you advice about something that is technically wrong about your lift. So, for example, not getting tight before a deadlift, or not kind of pulling the slack out of a bar on deadlift and jerking it off the floor sort of thing. Mm-hmm. That sort of thing, I think, can be that sort of advice. I'm not going to say you should give it in a gym, but if somebody is telling you about a technical aspect of your lift that you are not performing correctly, I think that's good advice to heed. If it's advice about your form necessarily, like, or kind of just, this is a really hard one for me to try and explain because I've just thought of it, and I need a second to formulate the words in my head. If your form is technically sound, but this person thinks that it could be, you could do this to improve your strength, or you say, oh, you need to do this to get stronger. I think that's the sort of advice you need to go, yeah, but why? And have a good rationale for, versus if there is a part of your technique that is not technically sound and you are doing the lift quote unquote wrong, and somebody is advising you on that and they have good rationale for it, then I think that is probably something to listen to.
So something like a safety consideration where you could be performing something in such a way that, look, you need to change this because you might get hurt if you don't. Is that kind of what you're getting at, or not necessarily?
Yeah. I'm very wary of saying do this or you'll get hurt to people.
Yeah, you don't want to put that idea in someone's head,
precisely.
Obviously. Yeah.
I don't want to be a potential stimulus for a pain experience when somebody does that lift. So I always phrase it in the context of you'll be stronger if you do this. But again, I always ask, if I'm on the very, very rare occasion that I'm going to do it, do you mind if I give you some quick advice? And I will always say, feel free to tell me to go away. That is absolutely fine. I always ask, and then you always, again, if you're going to give advice, you need to get some context. So ask a few questions. It's exactly the same way as if you're a personal trainer. You don't just go up to a random person on the gym floor and just completely change the way they're doing something based on what you've seen them squatting for 10 minutes.
Right.
You don't know anything about that person. You don't know where they've come from. You don't know their injury history. You don't know anything about their training history. So you're coming up and completely changing something. Why? Again, if you're going to give advice, get some context.
The training history thing, that's a huge point too. Yeah. I could use an example. I've had a client who he had pretty bad knee collapse, and we significantly improved it, like to a significant amount, but you can still identify knee collapse. And so people might look at that and say, oh, look how bad that is. He needs to do this or that, not knowing that, wait a second, over the past 2 months, look at how much better this has gotten. So he actually just needs to keep doing what he's doing because we're fixing it. So
sure,
that's good.
Absolutely. Next question.
Yeah, buddy.
I will take this one because I don't think Patrick's going to be able to pronounce the name.
Correct.
This is, I believe, Miko Velimar. I, again, profusely apologize if I've butchered the pronunciation of your name. I believe you to be Scandinavian of some description, with the number of A's and umlauts and double K's and everything. It looks like sort of Viking god type name. So we're going to go with that for now. A theme that seems to be coming up in discussions and research, not that it's a totally new thing, is individual needs / wants / metabolism / recovery, etc. What does this mean in practice for a trainer and a book / internet loving trainee? Take everything with a pinch of salt and test things out for yourself. What does this then mean for the significance of anecdotal evidence in quotation marks? Again, these are good questions.
They're damn good questions.
Yeah.
You want me to ramble on this for a bit first?
Yeah, you ramble.
You can close it with much better stuff that I'm about to say. I need to first say that I made the most amazing meatballs, dude, last night. And I don't mean to insert that before answering this question, but they were unbelievable. I seared them in the Instant Pot, and then I put some beef stock in there, and then I pressure cooked them. Oh my God.
I thought you were going to segue that really nicely into a really elegant answer to this question.
Not at all. This is 80. Totally just shifted gears on you and talked about the meatballs I made. And then I took baby potatoes and I put them in the meaty, brothy stuff that was left over. And then I pressure cooked the potatoes in there. And then I just sat in my chair smiling the whole night because I was so happy about my belly full of meatballs and potatoes. So regarding this question, I think it's a great question. And what it means in practice, I'll say for me as a coach, I'll use diet as an example. I'm going to keep some fundamental principles in mind that I think are going to apply to everyone. But once those principles are there, I'm going to then look at how to individualize things to maximize adherence to the diet. And so in this context, one example would be if someone wants to lose fat, we know with certainty they need to be in an energy deficit in order to do that. And so we need to find a way to get them to stick to a calorie target that is lower than their energy expenditure. And within that, you could look at things like, if I were to start setting up a diet, I would want to know whether they have a preference for carbohydrate or fat. And so I might ask some questions just to tease that out when I set those values. Looking at things like number of meals per day and making sure that you help them set something up to maximize their satisfaction while still maintaining the principle of being in a calorie deficit. If I were to apply this to something like training, we know that someone is going to need progressive overload in some fashion. We know that they're going to want to train all of their muscle groups. However, as far as individual needs and wants go, I would allow a lot of variety in terms of exercise selection. So for example, I'm not going to make everyone put a barbell on their back and squat, even though I'm a power lifter. There might be people that are just way happier doing a different type of a squat or a different type of lower body movement that trains the same muscle groups. And so I do think that testing things out for yourself can be a good thing as long as you're able to do that while keeping the bigger principles in mind. And so I think identify what those big picture items are in terms of training and diet, and understand what are the variables that are pretty much up for your tweaking to make it the best experience you can. So that's what I got.
And that's pretty much exactly what I was going to say with regards to principles versus methods, which I know is something we said on the podcast before, to prioritize principles over methods, but it's always worth hammering home. I think I'll follow up on the testing things out for yourself and the significance of anecdotal evidence aspect of this. I think that, my prediction would be that within the next kind of century, individualized prescription of various things is going to become not only more popular but more accessible to the lay person. I think that sort of the individualized medicine is already becoming more prevalent. I think individual training and nutrition prescription again can that's going to become prevalent and affordable, accessible, whatever. With advances in genetic testing, I'm pretty sure that's going to become a reality at some point, maybe sooner than the next century, maybe longer than the next century, I'm not sure, but that I'm pretty sure will become a thing.
Would you agree that it's not there yet? Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Because there are companies that advertise that they can do some sort of a genetic test and they'll tell you what foods to eat. And I'll have people that ask me, is this legit? And my understanding is no, it's not legit. We don't have that information yet where we could say something definitively. And so I think of it as kind of scammy, but not scammy in that it's likely that we will get to a point that we'll be doing that. But it's not there yet.
I think it's a really nice avenue of research, but I think that the conclusions or the body of evidence around that is far too small and far too premature to be able to sell a product based off the back of it right now. These sorts of things will always sell to a certain extent because obviously there's a certain mystique surrounding your genes and how they influence things. But as yet, no, it's not a valid not a valid test.
What was that? Was that a yawn?
Yeah, it was a kind of half-swallowed yawn.
That's amazing. That's the smallest yawn ever.
I'm good at those.
Carry on.
So with regards to testing things out for yourself and anecdotal evidence, I think, yes, by all means, test things out for yourself, but bear in mind that if these things work, then they are probably because they adhere to the various principles we have regarding training progress and body composition and all of that stuff. So be very wary of drawing direct causal relationships between the thing that you experimented with and the results you got. I think that we're terrible at doing science on humans when it's actual scientists doing it, let alone Joe Smith in his kitchen deciding to try an extra scoop of protein in his porridge for a week and seeing what happens. So again, be very careful of drawing causal relationships between the things you do and the outcomes that you see. And then anecdotal evidence. Now, I think the reason that anecdotal evidence has gotten such a bad rap, certainly within the realms of the online fitness community, is people will turn around and say, this is the best way to do X, Y, Z. I know because it works for me. Mm-hmm. I think that's why. I think that if you are using anecdotal evidence in that way, you really don't understand evidence at all. I think if you are turning around and saying, this may work for some people like me, I have tried numerous things and this seems to work best for me. If you want to try it, go for it. But I am by no means saying that this is the best way for me. I'm saying that this is potentially another option. Having studied the mechanisms a little bit, I think this might be the mechanism, but I'm not entirely sure. I think that is a perfectly valid way of using anecdotal evidence to propose something else that other people can then go and look further into. Again, I think that's the wonderful thing about evidence and science is that it builds on itself. People ask questions that then, spit out more questions to be answered. And I think if you're using anecdotal evidence in that way and saying, hey, I think this worked for me, this is how I did it. If you want to go and try this for yourself, it'd be awesome to see if it worked for you as well. I think that's a great way of using anecdotal evidence at the moment, in absence of this individualized prescription, which I am predicting will come about at some point. I think I will probably be a bit too old to take much advantage of it. But so, here we go.
Which means I'll be dead.
Oh, yeah. You'll be... I can't think of a pun, I'm afraid.
40. I turned 40 this year.
I turned 25.
You're a dick.
Yeah.
You're not really a dick. You're very likable.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the last question?
Yeah. This is my buddy. I'm going to mispronounce your name, dude, and I'm so sorry. It's Hyok, Hyok.
Hyok.
This dude is hysterical, by the way. He is one of my favorite Facebook friends. And he says, I'm not a fitness professional, but I do get asked a lot about nutrition from friends. One guy's really excited about doing low-carb / ketogenic dieting, rather than tell him all of the downsides, which is sure to turn him off. What do I do to help him low carb in a healthy way and perhaps eventually gently guide him to a more balanced diet? Honestly, my first question, I guess the way this is written, this is assuming that this person is asking you for your advice and for your help. And based on that, I would just tell him to eat a dick, man. And I would get a new friend. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that. I don't know what you would need to tell him, honestly, because unless he's planning on doing something just remarkably poorly set up, he might be just fine doing a low carb diet. I don't think that they are necessarily as bad as we sometimes make them out to be. I do think it might be a good idea that he understands that it does still come down to calories, and that the low carb diet is a tool to allow someone to stick to a calorie deficit to try to lose fat. I do think that could be just beneficial knowledge for someone to have, so that they don't, kind of going back to what you said about misattributing cause and effect, that people could easily believe that it has nothing to do with calories and that carbs are inherently fattening. And I don't know that it would be a good idea to have someone believe that, because you could have a situation where someone is clearly overeating calories on a low carb diet. It can happen. That's all I've got, really. And I know that's not a great answer, so I'm curious to hear what Harry Squatter over here is going to crank out.
This is obviously going to depend upon his knowledge level, I think, with this. I think you've got to tailor your response to the knowledge of the person asking it. I think if you're going to turn around to a personal trainer and start talking about all the nitty-gritty details of metabolism, yeah, fine. That they might clock on to why it might not necessarily be the best thing for them, or why it might be the thing that they need. But if you're going to talk to, random person on the street about why reducing insulin isn't the holy grail to reducing obesity, then I think that you might hit some very blank stares at that point. So again, I think I would echo Patrick's thoughts of just
get a new friend.
Well, yeah. No, I kid. I think just go for it. I think that setting one up really badly is harder than it sounds, unless you decide to follow the works of Dave Asprey, or Dave Asplay, as we've called him in podcasts previous.
I was waiting for that.
So, again, I think just stick to sources of fat that we know are relatively healthy. So, olive oil and unrefined, predominantly unsaturated fats. Certain, not overdoing tons of red meat or bacon or butter, making sure that you do eat some fruit and a fair amount of vegetables as well. I think the main thing that a lot of people might not clock onto is the importance of electrolytes. Now, in terms of my knowledge of that, it is not the greatest. I'm not hot on the importance of electrolytes within the context of a ketogenic diet. However, our good friend Adam Ali of Physeconomics fame, who's been on the podcast a couple of times, he experimented with a ketogenic diet back in 2015. He spent 6 months in a ketogenic state attempting to lose fat. And for those of you who are a little more savvy with regards to nutrition, so hyok, which by the way sounds amazingly like I'm like cutting vegetables on a chopping board, like a wooden chopping board. I'm going hyok, 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 hyok. I don't know. That's how I hear it in my head. I'm really sorry. He did a 9,000 word ebook all about his experiment, and it goes over what he did, what he found out, whether you should do one, how to set one up successfully, where I'm pretty sure he does talk about the electrolytes thing as well. Or he's been on the podcast, and I'm pretty sure he discussed it when he was on the podcast. So go listen to that. Go download his ebook. It's physeconomics.com/keto-experiment. And Hyok, you maybe want to read that yourself, and then you can maybe translate it for your friend if he's not quite at the same level of knowledge in terms of his ability to read this book. In terms of educating about the pros and cons of low carb versus kind of normal carb, Sigma Nutrition had an episode recently with Kevin Horlon, who did 2 very, very well-cited studies into the mechanisms of low-carb and low-fat dieting, and also the differences between a ketogenic diet and a non-ketogenic diet. He was on that, and it was a really, really great discussion if you want to go and find out more about what that research said, and his response to Gary Taubes effectively slagging him off at a live Q&A at a low-carb conference. It was a really great episode. I listened to it actually in the car this morning, and it was
I listened to it a couple of days ago, and it was fantastic. Might have been yesterday, in fact. It's really good. It
was a great episode. And he also had Stefan Guillenet on, and that was a great episode as well.
I need to listen to that one, and I also want to get his book, too.
I do. Very much. I wonder how much money he's made from that book.
Ask him.
Just
excuse me, sir. You don't know how much money have you made?
Yeah.
One thing that I'll just interject with, since my answer was remarkably crappy on this question, is that another main reason, aside from my belief that even though I don't low carb diet myself, I think that for some people it's a valid tool. Just the fact that you've said that he's really excited about doing this low carb diet, I think that's beneficial. I think the fact that he has a lot of buy-in towards doing it might help him stick to the diet, and that could produce pretty good results if that's the case. And so I kind of feel like because he has this high level of buy-in towards the diet, that he probably should try it and see how it goes. So I just wanted to throw that bit in.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to throw in. That is all the questions we have for this particular episode, and that is us pretty much out of time. GarageBand does this thing. I record our podcast in GarageBand. It doesn't tell me the time that we've been recording for. It tells me the number of bars. Now, if you're a musician, you'll know what I mean. If you don't, at the moment we've been recording for 1,248 bars, and I have no idea how long that is, but I'm pretty sure it's about as long as we normally record for. So I'm going to call that time there. I'm going to see if I can tell GarageBand to tell me the amount of time we've been recording for, because that might be helpful.
Nice.
And yeah, in the meantime, if you've not joined the Eat, Train, Progress group on Facebook, go and join it. We recently had the Stu Phillips join, which I got rather excited about. If you don't know Stu Phillips, protein researcher extraordinaire, all-round academic extraordinaire as well. He joined recently. So if you go and join, you'll be in pretty esteemed company, apart from the guy who said that all fat people should be offended by themselves.
Yeah, we don't care for that guy.
No, we really do not. And on that rather unsavory note, I'm not going to rant anymore about that, because I will probably say something that I shouldn't.
So, do you want to end on a savory note?
Like a meatball flavored note?
Dude, I have extra meatballs in the freezer right now, and today I am going to make more.
I'm so excited about your balls.
Yeah, buddy. They're very moist.
Oh, wow.
It's not good.
Moist balls.
Stu Phillips recently made a very good post about getting muscle hypertrophy from light loads, and kind of challenging the notion that you have to lift heavy in order to gain muscle. I thought it was an excellent post.
It was. Was it a Facebook post or was it a research paper?
It was a Facebook post, but he attached or linked several references to it. So I thought it was very good.
That's cool. You should go check out Stu Phillips if you've not done so already, and you are remotely interested in academic research. You should do that. We will call this to an end before I mention Patrick's moist balls again. So
good idea.
Until next time on Shredded by Science Radio, take care. If you've been listening to this in the gym, do try and not laugh too hard and drop things on your foot. Okay, thanks. Bye.